Hello and welcome to another Hoeg Law Impressions video. Today we're going to do something a little bit different because I have been playing a couple of hidden gem games this week. I decided to combine them into one video. So today we're going to talk about my impressions of two kind of independent developer styled role-playing games of a completely different type, both of which start with the letter O and both of which I've enjoyed pretty immensely. One a little bit more than the other, which you will hear in this video, but please do check it out. Today we're talking about Outward and Operencia. Outward is a survival sandbox role-playing game from developer Studios. And when I went to look up Studios for the purposes of this video and podcast to see what they had made before Outward, I was surprised to find that they hadn't really made anything that I was familiar with. They only made a couple of games, and I hadn't played either. And that was a surprise to me because Outward really does show a significant amount of development bravery and really putting themselves out there in a way that I always enjoy seeing. But it really is, at least from my perspective, their first major title to really explore this ground. And if you're not familiar with it and you're looking at this in video form, you're probably seeing that the graphics of Outward are not that impressive. It's an older looking game. It looks like maybe something from the early PlayStation 3 era or a high definition PlayStation 2 game with some cool lighting effects on sunsets and whatnot. But this game really isn't about graphics like some of the old school RPGs of old, especially PC players might be familiar with. This game is really premised around that sandbox word about being given a heading and a direction and said, hey, go have fun. Go find the next adventure over that horizon. Go find the next mountain peak, the next cave, the next goblin horde, whatever it is that you wind up doing. And that's something that we don't really get enough of, in my opinion. We've got Bethesda and the Elder Scrolls series and the Fallout series, which kind of have that framework, that have that open world where you can just go out and try to build the adventure yourself. But even in those games, you've got compass headings, you've got directions directly to whatever the next part of the story is. And really the premise of Outward is you're not the chosen one, you're not some hero of legend, you're just a person, either a guy or gal, and you've got some skills, you've got some ability to combat monsters, and you've got some survivability, but you don't have that kind of chosen one destiny. And so you go out there and it's dangerous. It really reminds me quite a bit when you go outside and it's too dark to see and it's very difficult to navigate of the Capcom cult classic, Dragon's Dogma, where you had that same kind of feeling where if you find yourself out after dark, if you find yourself between towns, it becomes scary, it becomes frightening in a very cool way. It becomes difficult to navigate. It becomes much more dangerous in terms of what monsters can do to you. And this game doesn't have nearly the same kind of combat as Dragon's Dogma does. Capcom is really a masterclass in most action games, I would say. But it does have that same kind of feeling, a real-world environment where that lantern that is hanging off your backpack isn't illuminating a full 30 meters around you. It's really only illuminating just the bare minimum for you to see where you're going. And where you're going is really part of the story of Outward because instead of a radar, you don't get a location on your map. You don't get a mini map. You can pull up what amounts to a paper map just like you would have used before the days of Google Maps or whatever else your preferred GPS system is. And it shows you the land that you're in. And Outward contains 4 different lands. But it doesn't tell you where your character is. And I found this to be a really awesome addition. One of the main problems I have with open world games in the kind of modern zeitgeist is the notion that you wind up just kind of following your little dot on the mini-map and navigating that way. I find myself doing that even in The Division 2, which I've been playing, where it kind of highlights where your mission is, and instead of looking at the environment, you can kind of follow the path of your mission just by looking at the mini-map. And so I'm guilty of that just as much as anybody else. But Outward doesn't do that. Outward doesn't even have the map on a really easy to remember button. It's on one of the digital pad buttons I've been playing on the Xbox. And when you pull it up, it just shows you the map of the land. It doesn't tell you where you've been, doesn't tell you where you are. And so you learn to really get to know the landmarks of the area. You get to know exactly how far you are from town, how far you need to go to get back if it's nighttime, where you might be able to successfully pitch a tent or unroll a bedroll. And those qualities, tents and bedrolls and things of that nature, are the second part of Outward's charm. It kind of fashions itself as a survival crafter type game as well as an RPG. And so you wind up having the things that are kind of typical of that survival genre of game. You have a hunger bar, you have a rest bar, you have a thirst bar, and you have kind of perks or negative perks that go along with being too hungry or too thirsty. But not, in my experience, to a level that's really distracting. I think you can have a survival game where you wind up essentially making things just way, way, way too hard to actually have fun in, to progress in. And Outward is really more about reminding you that you need to pick those berries and you'll have to eat in the next little while, but not constantly having to fill bars, which is one of the criticisms I levy pretty regularly at my sessions with No Man's Sky, which is a game I really enjoy, especially after all the patches. But I am somewhere between that game's normal and survival modes, and survival is just too annoying, and normal is kind of easy. It doesn't really have that pressure or push. And so I think Outward is more difficult than that, and it does give you that pressure or push. Now, it's an old school experience. It's not going to be one that's for everybody. If you're watching this on video, you can probably see that from the graphics. If you really need a photorealistic environment or something that looks awesome on your TV screen or on your computer monitor, this probably isn't that for you. But I think it's good enough. It conveys the land that you're traveling through. It gives you that excitement from crossing a bend and seeing something new. It really is a game for explorers. And that's one of the things that I have found in my game playing days that I really am. I like to see what's around the next bend. I want to see what the town in the next region looks like. That's fulfilling for me, and Outward is all about that. Frankly, the main narrative, such as it is much more of that kind of Bethesda Elder Scrolls, hey, there's some stuff going on, and you should just go out into the world, and maybe it's a good plot line, maybe it isn't. This is a first impressions type video. I've played it for a couple hours now, and I've really enjoyed it, which is why I'm talking about it now, and also to kind of give it a little bit of a signal boost because I have enjoyed it so much, and I haven't seen it discussed very, very much online. And it is something that really focuses on exploration more than combat. The combat is kind of a Dark Souls light, but it's clunky. It's not designed to be very efficient, whether that's because of the game design itself or the experience of the developers. I couldn't rightly say, because it does match some of the game design kind of philosophies. If you get into a fight with multiple people, you're probably going to lose, and so it incentivizes you to prepare. It incentivizes you to have traps ready, to figure out exactly how you're going to approach these two bandits on the road. And I also enjoy that experience. It's one of the experiences that I really enjoyed from the Witcher series, in which you really kind of wound up getting ready to fight something, going through the clues of a quest line in that game, figuring out what the monster is, reading your journal, figuring out what you should coat your sword in. This has different preparations, obviously, than a Witcher fighting supernatural monsters, but it has that same kind of feeling. Hey, if I just get in a one-on-one fight, I'm just a guy. I could lose, I could win, and the penalties for loss are pretty significant. You wind up losing your backpack and being captured by bandits or stuck in a monster cave and trying to escape and get out. And it works from a storytelling point of view, but it's a very high penalty. It's not an instant respawn. It's not a restart in a place before the combat. And so you wind up, like a survival horror game, constantly really thinking about what your next step should be, running from combat and danger if it becomes too much. And I think that's a feeling that we don't get enough of in the video game experiences that tend to be more power fantasy oriented. The last couple things I wanted to say about Outward are that the music is absolutely fantastic, and you hear that right from the opening menu. It has this lovely kind of adventure tones to it that reminds me of the Lord of the Rings movies or of the Hobbit movies. There's adventure on the path, get out on the path, go out there and find it. And I think that's exactly the right tone to take with a game like this. So if you are at all interested in what I've had to say about this, I think it is well worth taking a look at. It's not a full-priced game, and I think it's $40 in United States dollars. But I have had a good time with it. It is, again, my first impressions, really. I've probably spent maybe a half dozen hours with it at this point, and just really made it into the next region. I think there are 4. And it's worth your time. It's got a kind of chunky feel to it. It's got a lot of inventory management. It's got a lot of that kind of old school PC flavor that I think has been missing a little bit and that I really like. It's not perfect. It doesn't have the polish of a modern kind of AAA title. It doesn't have the polish maybe of even a AA title, but it doesn't break when you play it. And one of the things I haven't gotten a chance to try yet is that it has couch co-op. It has live kind of split-screen cooperative play that could be fun if you've got another person in your apartment or your house that likes these kinds of things as well. I can imagine that would be a good time. But I haven't gotten a chance to try that myself, and I will look to do that in the future. But as of right now, I think Outward is worth checking out. I have been enjoying it, and I do recommend you checking it out as well. Operencia, which is just really fun to say in the first instance, is a first-person, dungeon-crawling, party-based role-playing game from developer Zen Studios, of Zen pinball fame. If you're a pinball fan like I am, you know the Zen name from their myriad of pinball tables that they have made, particularly those that are licensed. They have made all of the Star Wars pinball tables that you can play on the PlayStation and Xbox and Switch and PC, and the Marvel pinball tables, and I think they made some with the Universal licenses and maybe the Paramount licenses, and I think they made a Bethesda pinball game. So they've been doing this for a long, long time, and they've made littler kind of arcade experiences as well at the same time as they've been making the pinball games, but that's really where they have made their money, where their bread is buttered, and they have done it well. I have Zen Pinball on, I think, maybe all of my systems because I do enjoy them, and they have been a good developer to follow and to watch the pinball machines come out of. But if you say, well, that's an interesting development history for a game that you described as a first-person dungeon-crawling RPG, I agree with you entirely. It was a surprise when I looked at this game on the Xbox Live Store when I saw it announced a couple months ago, and seeing that it was from Zen. But I have to say, this has been one of my absolutely favorite hidden gems to come out in the last little while with absolutely no kind of fanfare. It is absolutely fantastic. Now, it does take someone that likes this type of game, and we're going to talk about what type of game this is in just a minute. But if you wind up listening to this video or listening to it on a podcast or what have you, I do highly recommend, if it sounds at all interesting to you, to check it out, because it has been absolutely wonderful to play. And I really do think it's very likely to wind up at the end of the year on my Game of the Year lists. So let's talk about it a little bit. First, what in the heck does Operencia mean? I'm looking now at their FAQ here that says, if you translate the word Operencia from Hungarian to English, you'll get the phrase far, far away. You can tell the name derives from many Central European folktales. In fact, many of them begin citing Operencia as the location where their tale is told. This is not a real place, never has been, but it's universally understood to be a place far away from where the story is being told. So a little bit like Star Wars, a galaxy far, far away. As a setting for this game, it's an entire world, as our narrator puts it, on the other side of imagination. If you can imagine it, it's there in some capacity. This includes everything from truly fantastical tales to more legendary takes on characters who were larger than life, which is a long way of saying Operencia is essentially their name for Fairy Tale Land. And Fairy Tale Land in particular, with a focus on Central European folktales. So it has some of that feeling that you might have gotten from playing The Witcher. It's not American folktales. It's not really Western European folktales as much. It is this kind of Eastern European flavor, and it's a new flavor, and it's an interesting one, and a lot of fun to really see kind of new stuff that, as an American, I'm not used to seeing in the way these folktales are told. So that's really the baseline. Operencia is this fairy tale, and you heard reference in the FAQ to a narrator. And that's one of the things that really stands out in terms of the way they tell this story. It's got a narrator, and it's got not just a narrator in cutscenes. When you go, to a puzzle in a dungeon and you pull the wrong lever, the narrator says something snidely about how your party members are laughing at your inability to get this lever puzzle right. It's a constant presence, making it feel like a story being told. And it's a presence that hasn't deviated insofar that I have played this. Now, this isn't a post-mortem. This is an impressions video. And I have played through about the first 2 dungeons, which is about a half dozen hours of play. And throughout that entire time, they've really kind of stuck to the concession. It's a fairy tale land. You're meeting these characters. There's different things that can happen. There's dragons. There's vials that help you see beyond walls, and all these kinds of conceits that live in the, as they say, imagination. And it's really an interesting place to be. The very first dungeon, so there's a mild spoiler, but it's the very first dungeon, so you'll get to it in about 15 minutes of play after the tutorial, is a castle underwater where the lake has been split open to give you a path to the castle, and then the entirety of the dungeon features water that's on the ceiling because it's been spread out from this sunken castle, and various hallways have water within them where you have to hold your breath in order to explore the environment properly, and where frog men fight you with giant frog spears and taunt you with frog taunts. And even that kind of fantastical imaginary conceit winds up being filled with lore as much as possible. You wind up meeting someone there that talks to you about why this castle exists, how it sank, what the tale is that is legend, but that led to its sinking, who these frog people are that you're fighting, who the skeletons are that you wind up meeting that you're fighting, who the end boss is, and how that relates to something else that happens in the dungeon, why you're doing what you're doing when you get there. And it's that kind of fill-in that really makes for a wonderful experience if you're a role-playing game fan, if you're a fan of these stories, because, hey, they did a great job of making these dungeons explorable, having fun stuff to interact with, puzzles to solve, fights to get into, and that would have been enough, honestly. But they also took the time to have essentially these conversations with your companions, a codex very similar to The Witcher that talks about the various background pieces, the various people involved, and it gives it that much more robust, fulsome feeling that makes you want to turn the corner, that makes you want to see what's next, because it's so interesting, because it's so well written. It is absolutely fantastic for that purpose alone. But talking about the game mechanics, if you're not familiar with a first-person dungeon crawling RPG, we had a couple of them in the recent past, the Grimrock series, but it really calls back to me, to my youth of playing games like Wizardry and Might and Magic, not Heroes of Might and Magic, the original Might and Magic series, where you have this grid-based kind of walking, and you have party members that join you, and they are mostly depicted as little heads, either in the corner or on the bottom. And you travel through these dungeons and look for ways to progress. You look for handles to pull, you look for torches to turn, you look for keys to chests and chests to open, and you wind up getting into fights. And different games can have different ways that you wind up getting into these fights. In this case, you've got actual enemies that are walking around the dungeon that you can ambush if you get behind them. But whenever that battle starts, whether you're in front of them or behind them, you go to a turn-based fighting system. And that turn-based fighting system has a couple of standard attacks, and it has a couple of special attacks that you are slowly building up through a skill tree. And when you use one of those special attacks, you use what is called energy in the game mechanics. And if you need to refill that energy, there are some skills that can help you do that. But most often, you have to find firewood and a campsite in the dungeon, and you rest and relax and get that energy back so that you can proceed further on in the dungeon. Now, those rest points are another area in which the game takes the opportunity to tell its story. And so when you go to rest and you've had something happen, or you have a new companion, or you have something else that somebody wants to say to you, that rest period is the time when the companions talk. And they talk to you about why the dungeon exists, what their motivations are for being in the dungeon. They just lightly mock you about whatever your background might be as the player-created character. And that is a great time to really feel like you're essentially on a dungeon exploration. And so, like I said with the writing, every little bit of this game kind of contributes to this notion of you actually being in this fantastical fairy tale world and not just playing a video game. And I always like to see folks really get behind the story they're telling. And that can fall apart if the writing isn't great, but the writing is really, really good. And that was a bit of a surprise for me insofar as Zen Studios doesn't have any background in writing, as far as I know. There's no writing really in their pinball games. And as it was shown in Operencia, they're really quite good at it. There's a witty approach to the codex that, again, does mirror that kind of Witcher approach. If you're familiar with that series, you essentially have a bard that is a friend of the Witcher, and he writes in the journal in a kind of sarcastic kind of sneaky way, and especially aggrandizing his own contributions to the adventure. This isn't the same character that's doing that, but the first character that you meet in Operencia is in charge of the journal. And like that, rather than a kind of bland, neutral, over-narration kind of codex, it is instead written from the perspective of this one character, and you get that flavor, you get those witticisms, you get some of that light mocking of the player character that helps to ingrain the various characters in the story, helps to get you involved in the story, and it works very, very, very well. So if you do like those kinds of fairy tale approaches, if you like the concept of a story being told and a group of adventurers kind of going on into a dungeon to explore it, to find treasure, to save people that are caught by an evil and ancient dragon, to solve puzzles that involve runes on walls and seeing mystical lights, it is a lot of fun. Graphically, as you can probably see, it's what you might consider middle of the road for the overall environment of video games today, but in terms of this type of game, which hasn't been made very often since it really went out of style, but even when it has been made, has tended to be a lower quality of graphics, tended to be a kind of 8-bit or 16-bit kind of approach to how it looks. The graphics here are fantastic, and the performance of the game is fantastic. I'm playing on the Xbox One X, and it is very zippy into and out of combat. It's very zippy in terms of turning corners and navigating your map. It gives you a number of combat options and a number of difficulty options for whether or not you want the game to map things for you. I will tell you from personal experience, you do want them to map it for you. It's a lot of fun to use graph paper like back in the old days, but really the only time you ever wind up hating that graph paper is when you made a mistake, and it's very difficult to recover from that. So I recommend letting them map it for you, but it's up to you. They have that option. You can set different permanent death states, Iron Man mode, different combat difficulty levels, etc. And it gives you all of those options. It doesn't really let you change the environmental puzzles, which would obviously be difficult to do, and they are tricky. It is certainly beholden to the kind of old school approach of really look at all those pixels, really try to figure out where anything might be hidden. You're going to need to pick up items off the ground. You're going to need to find secret blocks in the wall to touch to open up a secret passage to get around an impassable door. You're going to have to figure out exactly how these ropes work together in order to solve a puzzle in a room 3 towers away. And for me, that's a lot of fun. I think some might find it a little bit unusual. It's not really a skill that's been trained in most modern video games, but it is one that I'm greatly appreciative for having in there. Like I said, the first 2 environments that I have played through have both been graphically very, very pretty, very interesting to explore, to see what's next, to have those conversations with companions. I mentioned that they happen at campsites. They can also happen when you stumble upon a new puzzle or when you see something particularly interesting in the dungeon. Your companions chime in and they talk to you. Now, I don't want, when I say the writing is great, I don't want anybody to get confused about what it is. It is not, at least so far, focusing on what I would consider the kind of Western RPG approach of choice and consequence and being able to change your story. This is a much more kind of Japanese role-playing game approach where they have a story that they want to tell you. They have a story that is going to happen, and they believe in it, and you're just along for the ride, really. So it's a little bit more like those Japanese role-playing games, like a Final Fantasy or like one of those where this is a story, your character is really got all this background, is responding for you, you're not choosing dialogue choices for them, and everything else is just happening and you're progressing through the story. I tend to like that. Some folks might not. It's not Fallout, it's not Elder Scrolls, you're not kind of controlling that story for yourself. But I think if you are interested in a story being told to you, so far so good in terms of my playthrough through Operencia. They seem to have a story worth telling, and they seem to be telling it well. And so with good graphics, with zippy combat, with good environmental puzzles, with great writing, and a loot system that is at least functional. It doesn't seem to have anything terribly exciting so far. I mentioned skill trees. It's really just kind of setting up what kind of weapon you want to use. And again, since it's all first person, you're not really seeing your characters animate. You're not really seeing armor placed on any kind of character models or anything. You have nice pictures of them that come up when they have dialogue, but this is not that kind of game. So it's not really a loot chase as much as it's just kind of a power grind that you're trying to get up in power to proceed past whatever the next obstacle is. And that's a lot of fun, but it's not the kind of game that you're really focusing on finding the wand of invincible dragons or whatever it might be. At least not yet. Those things tend to come in the late game and the end game, and I think it's very possible that I will wind up doing a post-mortem on this game because I have enjoyed it so much. But for right now, the loot is short sword, standard sword, and I've been playing it long enough that I haven't seen anything super exciting or that really changes the model of the game paradigm. The skill trees are really what are going to do that. They're on cooldowns, they use energy, and so building up those skill trees as you gain levels is really where the modification of the player experience is. Other than that, the one thing that I would mention is that it's not full price. I think it's $30. It is, in my opinion, it's the best $30 you could spend if you're at all interested in what I've had to say in respect of Operencia so far. But also, if you're on Xbox and if you have Game Pass, it's a day one Game Pass game. And I do recommend, if you have Game Pass, at least downloading it, firing it up, giving it a try. Like all games that are quote-unquote free, it's getting hit a little bit in the reviews on the Xbox, which I feel bad about. It's got a couple one-star reviews that essentially say, not for me, bro. And that's fine. That happens when you have free releases. You see that all the time in the Apple Store and things like that. But it feels bad because it is such a good, polished experience. And really, for me personally, a full-priced style experience that I couldn't recommend checking it out more. Right now, 2 dungeons in, and I believe their marketing materials say there are about 13 dungeons. If they keep up that level of imagination, if they keep up that level of writing, that companion interaction, the overall story, I can easily see this coming in very high on my top 10 list at the end of the year, and out of nowhere. I'm super impressed with this game. I'm super impressed with the time I have spent with it, and I'm excited to share it with you all. So if you've got Game Pass, absolutely download it, check it out. If you're looking for something that's a little bit different, that has those fantastical elements, I think it's $30. Absolutely check it out. But otherwise, this has been one of my favorite kind of hidden gem, shadow drop type experiences of 2019 so far, and I could not recommend it more if you're at all interested in what I've described today. And so those were my impressions, thoughts on Outward and Operencia. If you like this video, please do like, please subscribe. I regularly talk about video games, movies, and all sorts of pop culture, as well as legality and law and business of the video game industry and information technology and everything else I'm looking at in my series, Virtual Legality. So please do check it out. Thank you so much for watching on this YouTube channel or for listening if you're listening to it in podcast form. And I will catch you on the next episode of this channel.